Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on treating database code just like app code. I'm Christina Cardoza, news editor of SC Times. Before we get started, I have a couple of quick housekeeping announcements. First, if at any time you have any questions about or during the presentation, you may submit them using the control panel's questions tab. Secondly, this webinar will be recorded and available on demand through the sctimes.com website in about 24 hours after the event. Here at SC Times, we've been writing a lot about the DevOps space, and one area in particular that doesn't get as much attention is data. And that's because database development and data ops process follow a different workflow, but can sometimes cause bottlenecks in the DevOps process. Today's webinar will look about how to tackle that problem using application development best practices. Presenting today, we have Robert Reeves, the CTO and co-founder of Datacle, Adam Bowen, a strategic advisor at Delphix, and Stephen O'Grady, principal analyst and co-founder at Redmark. So now to get things started, I'm going to throw it over to you, Robert.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you. Stephen, Adam, how are you?
Doing very well.
Doing great, Robert.
Okay. Well, we're going to talk about, databases, code, DBAs, application developers, all that good stuff. And here's the agenda that we're laying out. We're going to talk about where we are today. Where do we want to go? How do we get there? And what do we get there? Is the juice worth the squeeze? Now, remember, folks, we've got a few polls coming up because we want to get input from the audience. And also, we've got a period where we're going to be answering some questions. So go ahead and use the GoToWebinar widget to answer questions, and we'll go ahead and make sure to get those at the end. But let's talk about where we are now. We're in a pretty good place. I think, Stevens, when he wrote The New Kingmakers, really laid it out that developers are in charge. We are the engines of improvement for our companies. And, Mark Andreessen wrote that seminal Wall Street Journal opinion piece about software will eat the world. And the leaders in our companies have listened. We are certainly using applications to drive cost cutting and increase revenue for our companies. We are getting faster. However, there's always a however, right? We've got some areas to improve. So our friends over at Dora, Dr. Nicole Forsgren, they do a annual report, State of DevOps report. And what was really interesting was the 2018 version issue of it was they focused on the database. And they found that the database change process, it is often risky. It causes delays. And it turns out that they found that companies, no surprise, that integrate and automate the database change process into their release pipelines have more positive software delivery outcomes. What's even more interesting is that it's not differentiated across low, medium, high, and elite IT performers. And when I heard that from Dr. Forsgren, I didn't know what that meant. And she said that that's actually a statistical term that means it doesn't matter if you are just starting your DevOps journey or you've been doing it for a while. If you are a low, medium, high, or elite performer, all can benefit from addressing this database problem. Unfortunately, we're not doing that. There's a whole lot of reasons why our application development teams avoid the data group. The number one thing there is that they're too slow. And that's a problem that developers are having. We, live in a world where we are able to write code, commit it, and it shows up on our dev and test and production servers. This part is automated. When we compare that to how our database team takes those changes, consumes them, those requests, through that DevOps anti-pattern, the ticket, boy, it sure is a lot slower. And there's a whole lot of other things that are going on here when we have this shared data services group that is in charge with updating the database. Developers look at them and see them offering, their opinion is that they offer little value, they're difficult to work with. They say, oh, I didn't know. I didn't even know they exist. I didn't know I'm supposed to talk to them. We got an 8% here. They're not allowed to. That's weird. But this idea that we needed a shared data services team separate from our developer team was created when, we were putting out a release once a quarter, maybe once a month if we were lucky. And we wanted the world's fastest computer to review all these changes. They can't keep up. And what we're seeing now is a gap between the rate at which we're able to release the application, the lowercase a, the compiled bits part of it, with the rate at which we're able to release our database changes. We got to update that table, add a column, when we add an attribute to an object. These are traveling through very different workflows, and they're not in alignment. And as we get faster on the application side, when we start to bring in DevOps, there's a real need for data ops. We have got to close this gap because a herd is only as fast as its slowest member. And if we really want to improve how quickly we get software out the door so that we can have better learnings, a faster feedback cycle, so we can improve that software, we've got to improve what we're doing on the database side. And so, that's certainly my opinion of it, but I think we'd all like to hear, some of Stephen's observations on this and what Redmonk is saying from more than just the folks that we talk to at Datical and Delphix.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Robert. I think a lot of what we talk about today essentially is the interplay and the differences in evolutions, if you will, between the application development side of the house and the data management side of the house. All right. So on the application development side, we have a set of processes and technologies that have been refined, evolved, improved over decades, right? And speaking as somebody who's been in this industry far longer than I would care to admit, the application development process today looks nothing like it did, when I was a systems integrator, right? From the tools to the processes to the methodologies, frankly, just down to the output, right? In terms of the frequency of output and so on, it's a completely different world. It's a completely different process. And part of that effort, to improve velocity, to improve the speed, has been, the organization, and essentially imperative, the organization drive to begin breaking down the artificial barriers between their application development and their operational teams. So many of you have probably grown up, many of you probably still live in this world, in which application development and operations are separated by a bright line. A firewall within the organization, have very, very little interplay between each other. What we found, certainly today, is that sort of fast-moving organizations have to work to break down those barriers because it's not efficient, to have teams that are completely siloed, right? Particularly as the technologies themselves begin to conflate and blur the lines between, okay, what's an application development task and what's an operational task. So that's the sort of backdrop from a procedural standpoint. The backdrop from a business standpoint is that, digital business is essentially now table stakes. So versus 5 or 10 or certainly 20 years ago, the sort of option to have sort of a aspect of your business in a digital form is in fact not an option anymore, right? That is, as stated here, it's table stakes. So the simple example of this is things like, if you have a local credit union, 5 or 10 years ago, they might not have had something like online banking. Today, they don't have that option, right? That's just a sort of required offering. So, sort of on top of that, if you assume that is the case, if you assume that, look, most of these digital quote unquote transformations have already occurred, what becomes sort of the driver at that point? Well, it goes back to what Robert referred to in terms of the software is eating the world. right? Because what that implies is this is the op-ed from Mark Andreessen. What that implies is that into a variety of traditional industries have poured, quote unquote, digital natives, right? So these are, technology first, software centric firms, and what they lack in terms of sort of experience and exposure to a given industry, they are trying to make up for, with a much, much faster and much more rapid pace of development. So what enterprises today have to ask themselves is not, hey, is this business online? But in fact, can I sort of move this at the pace that I need to? Can I operate? Can I innovate? Can I iterate, at the same velocity as sort of these would-be, disruptors, that are trying to eat the world? And so you have on the business side, you have this drive, and then on the process side, from an application development side, you have this drive. And the interesting thing is that in most cases, if you talk to data operations teams today, they generally, unlike their application development counterparts, they generally look much like they did, a decade or more ago, right? Some of the tools have changed. In some cases, the same tools are sort of in place, but the procedures have, persisted. And that bright line, as Robert showed in the graph two slides ago, persists, right? Where you have data operations and data management as a completely separate category from application development. So what all this sort of means collectively is that enterprises that have seen, these order of magnitude improvements in their application release cycles, sort of in part due to DevOps, are wondering why their database teams can't evolve in a similar fashion, right? In other words, why can I iterate, and why have, sort of I seen all this improvement and all this change in one area of my application development stack, and the other is stagnating by comparison? So, this is why, the sort of modern software development organizations, the modern technology organizations that we speak with today, the ones that are pushing the envelope, the ones that are sort of, that are prizing velocity and in fact achieving velocity, they are turning to essentially what we refer to as data ops, right? Which is the idea of, hey, we can bring some of the sort of procedural elements in terms of breaking down barriers, sort of treating, sort of the data side, much as we would treat the application development side, in a search for better velocity, and frankly, in a search for better organizational cohesion, top to bottom. So with that, if I'm not mistaken, I think we have a poll question coming up next.
We sure do. And so I'm going to go ahead and look at the audience view here. So we've got a poll question. What challenges does your team face in accelerating the database deployment process? We got a number of choices here. And so go ahead and select them. We'll keep this open for a little while. I'll leave it up to our friends at SD Times. They know the appropriate time to shut this down. I don't know. I just know databases. Oh dear, we've got we almost to a minute. All righty, and let's close it out. Looks like lack tools to automate the database deployment process. Nobody selected other. I'm glad, because I don't know how to respond to other. Certainly we had some folks that mentioned, it requires multiple cycles, feedback from the database script review process. And we had 8% that says accelerating database deployments has no challenges. And that's very exciting that you have that 8% of the folks that responded have decided to spend their time with us and they have no challenges. Was the movie, the meme where it said, I don't believe you, right? Is that right, Adam?
You got it, buddy.
So we've got part two here, and basically Adam is going to lay out, where do we want to go and how do we get there? And Adam, it's not just changing the database schema, right? It's also access to the data as a problem. And so you let me know when I need to advance these slides for you, bud.
All right, my man. No, you got it. Let's go and go to the next slide, Robert. It's not about just about changes. It's not just about the data itself. It's about treating it all as one giant entity to move together. It's like trying to separate your code from your middle tier and from your application or from your infrastructure, et cetera. We realized in the DevOps space that really we had to be able to, treat all of our components as code. It wasn't enough to put application code and version control. We had to define our infrastructure as such and be able to automate it and deploy it the same way that we do our code, so things can ship together, build together to improve velocity and also quality and reliability, which are all things that we focus on, and even observability, which is a big trend today. But if we look at what it takes to actually be able to leverage data across our ecosystems, then we look at an issue like this, such as being able to use our products together for rapid deployment. If you think of one of the barriers to being able to deliver software today, it's being able to deliver the right data to the right teams that need it. How many of our participants today actually have sprint cycles that might measure in weeks, but they either go multiple sprints without refreshing the data, or they have this fictitious kind of lead time for those sprints. So if it takes you, 3 weeks and multiple tickets to get data, and you're waiting on that to start a sprint, how long are your sprints? I know my colleague Sanjeev Sharma also talks about this as well. I was actually on the phone today with a potential customer, and they run in 2-week sprints, but they only refresh about once every 9 months. And so I said, so you only refresh once every 18 releases? He said, no, it's not like that. And then he sat there for a second, silent. He's like, actually, now that I do the math, yeah, we do. We only refresh once every 18 releases. And he had this look of consternation, this look of fear on his face. And I would imagine, because I have ran into multiple people like that becomes a challenge. But if you look at the way that our solutions work together, so from a Dolphix perspective, Dolphix is a data ops platform for application development that can be deployed on premise or in the cloud. And our focus is on eliminating the 3 data bottlenecks that are inhibiting your application development value chain. So first is getting the right data to the right people. We call that deliver. So I think 451 research study showed that 85% or 76%, I believe, of people not only do they have to wait multiple days, but it requires multiple touches. On average, it took 4 different people over 4 days to deliver a data set, and that's for the simple data sets, not the complex ones, which we know it all takes longer. Some of us would kill for 4 days. And 86% of those people also surveyed said that they have concerns securing data that's going to be shared. And of course, that results in complex governance policies and other things in place. And that creates a governance bottleneck. And then the third piece is actually about, I think 86% of respondents said that they have to wait time for the wait for data for them actually impacts their ability to go faster and release software on demand. And so that creates a release bottleneck. And what you look at in this diagram here is actually it's a kind of a sanitized example of several customers that Datacle and Dolphix have together, where Dolphix is syncing and masking their sources for data. So that might be connecting directly to production, or it might be, some gold master test sources, et cetera, and is instantly and automatically providing the right data, the fit for purpose data, into those lower environments for development, for unit testing, integration testing, so on. But what happens is now you have production-like data, production-like schemas, et cetera, throughout anywhere in your value chain. And for those of you that have, speaking of Dr. Forsgren, that have read the DevOps Handbook, which she and Jez Humble and Gene Kim, John Willis, and I think Damon Edwards also had a part in writing, the beginning of chapter 9 says the foundations for a solid deployment pipeline are what? It's being able to reproduce production at any given point in the value chain, and that does include data. So by being able to produce production-like data, including the schemas and full business value, realistic but masked data into your lower environments, you're now able to do things such as test the schema changes and database object changes, what those effects would be if you were to deploy those to production today. And so in this example, what you see in the slide is that we have a simple application development value chain here being pushed, where a developer might push his or her code to Git. That triggers a Jenkins job, nothing fancy there. But what happens is during that build process is that in addition to the normal chain, which is, okay, now you're going to spin up some infrastructure and deploy my code and et cetera, we also have data defined as a part of this. This data pipeline is also defined as part of my application delivery value chain. Whereas Jenkins tells Delphix, all right, Delphix, I need you to refresh the data in my lower environment, whether it's regression, unit, what have you. I need you to refresh and put the right data there. So that way I can actually take these changes that were also, these database changes that were also committed by my developer, and I can then apply them against a production-like schema. And that's where Datical comes in to deploy those changes on top of it. So now we know all the way left, if we look at the concept of shifting left, we know all the way early in the development cycle, if we were to release this feature to production today, including code and database changes, what impact would that be on the underpinning database? And which I know is a challenge for a lot of people today. But both of these products are completely API driven, so they can be driven by Jenkins, to where our developers and testers, all they have to do is develop and test. They don't have to be concerned with what buttons do I push, what screens do I need to log into. Just use your native tools and continue to work. Of course, ultimately this translates to what? We shift left, so we're finding everything super early, which allows us to fix things super fast. We're able to decrease the cost of that because we know the sooner we find things, the cheaper it is to fix them. And then ultimately we're able to accelerate the time to market because we don't waste time on trying to write backup scripts or waiting till the environment becomes available so we don't step on somebody else's work. The cost for innovation becomes next to zero because we can easily reset, rewind that data with one click of a button or one API call, and it's available in minutes. Can we go to the next slide, Robert?
Oh, sure. But that's a great point, because this idea of, we have to be able to roll back. And the reason why is because we don't want to cause damage to our data. But these instances, these are virtual, they're ephemeral. They don't really exist, these virtual databases. And so if we fire one up in development and we wreck it, well, we just shut it down and get a new one until we get it right. And then when it comes time to production, we don't have any surprises. There's no need to roll back, because if we were going to run into a problem, well, we certainly would have caught it because we're testing against production or production-like data.
No, that's exactly right. Look, I think everybody has a healthy fear of pushing changes to production on a Friday, right? If you follow some people on Twitter, there's a big flame war going on about this right now, about how people who do that are cowards and blah, blah, blah. I get it. You follow the same people I do, Robert. So I'm not going to get into that philosophical battle. But what I do want to point out too is that the funny thing is that a lot of people have that same sentiment about pushing changes into their lower environments on a weekend. Why? Because if I'm an application developer and I do something that's a breaking change and I do it late on a Friday, that means by the time I got a ticket submitted and all that stuff, and the database team got back in, et cetera, they're probably not going to work weekends, or the database team's going to hate me because they're working a weekend. But I know I'm not going to have my environment till midday Monday at best by the time people get in, right? So we start worrying about how the complexity and the fragility of these lower environments. But in Delphix environments, where you have a setup like this with Delphix and Datical, the worst case is I click a button and everything's back in 5 minutes. One of our largest customers has 30,000 applications, right? And they standardize on Delphix across their enterprise. And one of their particular applications actually consists of 400 databases. So that's one application, consists of 400 databases. These all happen to be Sybase in this case. But in the worst case scenario, and of course you can imagine, there's thousands of developers co-developing on this application. In the worst case scenario, if somebody does something that's a breaking change and they need to reset it, they literally click reset, and in minutes, it has the whole data environment. It's got to bounce it down and bring it back up, but we're literally talking in minutes. The whole application estate is back to before that breaking change happened and up and ready for people to use in just moments. So yes, there are multiple times a day where an environment might be down for 5 minutes. And you say, well, that's not good. Actually, it is. Because what they actually found is that the increase in features they were able to release and go to market went up by 5 times as much, because people were not inhibited by the fear of the cost of innovating. So the cost of being down a few times a day, 5 minutes, and they have multiple environments, being down for 5 minutes a few times a day, that cost was far outweighed by the benefit of people just being able to do good work and be able to do it without the fear of taking an environment down for a whole day. It just unlocked the cost of innovation, and that's just a huge difference maker. So I ask each and everybody who's on here, of all the attendees, if you were to go into your environment right now and just truncate the whole database, or as an application developer, how long would it take to get that restored, and what would be the impact on your day? If the answer is anything greater than 5 minutes, there is a better way. All right, Robert, shall we go to the next one?
Oh, sure.
You are my slide Sherpa here. So one of the actual benefits is then, so if you have Delphix in place to do this as well, then if you push that, if something happens to production, you actually now have the ability to recreate production in a moment's notice. Give you a great idea of another one of our customers where they bought Delphix and Datacult for being able to deploy that last scenario I just talked about. But you know what happened is that a DBA, I know this wouldn't happen to anybody on this webinar, but at less reputable companies, let's say, the database administrator thought they were dropping the video on demand table in development, but did it to production. Now, the funny thing about doing a logical drop like that is that no matter how much HA and DR you pay for, it will replicate that table drop to every instance you have, because that's a completely valid operation. And so this multi-million-dollar global company was looking at actually being down for almost a whole day to be able to go back and trace and restore the backups from tape and to play all the transactions forward to get to this precise point in time to restore the outage. But they just recently bought Delphix, so that was very fortuitous. But what they were able to do is they were able to say, give me a copy of production from the transaction before that happened. So SCN number, 12345, give me a copy of that. That copy was available in minutes. They were able to export that video on demand table out of that virtual copy, put it back into production, restore operation in just a handful of hours, and save them millions of dollars. So that's part of the transitive properties of being able to have, when you have a solution like this, that it extends to everywhere in your application development value chain, not just the dev and the testing, but even production support and your mean time to repair. Any thoughts on that, Robert?
Look, it's when we're bringing in DevOps, when we're bringing in data ops, as the name implies, we have to provide value to both sides of that equation. We have to give improvement to our developers. We also have to give improvement to our operations folks. We need buy-in from both sides. Everybody that has a stake in this needs to weigh in, and we need to listen to them, and we need to make sure that any kind of change we're doing to the organization, we're benefiting everybody, because that's how change happens. If we're all on board as a team, things are going to happen. If we're not, if we're fighting amongst ourselves, nothing's going to happen in our company. It's just, we're going to, just doggy paddle and wallow in mediocrity.
Right. Well, and one of the interesting points of this that Stephen brought up here, one of my earliest customers. Now we know today that amongst anti-patterns are long-lived feature branches, but also hotfix branches. But we know in the reality, if all of us aren't Nike or all of us aren't Amazon, though we wish we could be, right? So the reality is that we do work in a land of hotfix branches and things like that. But what happens is the changes that might be pushed into production for those hotfix changes, those are out of band. Those are out of band in my development value stream. So that means I can actually be working in development on something that I thought looked like production, but it only looks as production as old as the last time I refreshed it. So if it's 2 months or 2 weeks and I have a 2-week sprint, but we've released 1 or 2 hotfixes since then, I could potentially be actually introducing another breaking change on top of something that's just there. But with Delphix, you have that ability to then, at any given point in the value stream, to say, you know what, give me the latest mass copy of production for use in this environment, and I can test exactly what production looks like today. And that is super powerful, because that would reflect any sort of out-of-band changes, like from hotfixes or even somebody manually going in and doing things. So it eliminates that stepping on other fixes. So shall we go to the next one, Robert?
Well, absolutely. We've got a poll question here.
Awesome.
Has your team ever experienced production issues due to database change errors?
We must be asking the wrong crowd. I know we have a high bar of the elites here with us today.
I think the same people that are that did that 8%.
Yeah, they're right because they don't work with data whatsoever. They're here for purely scientific. Maybe they're students.
Yeah.
Maybe they're students.
It's like, well, I haven't dealt with it. Not my problem. Somebody else's.
Yeah, not my chair, not my problem. Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
So look, according to our poll, has your team ever experienced production issues due to database change errors? I can tell by this poll that 85% of you are honest and 15% of you are a little bit shy and bashful in front of a crowd. Perfect.
Okay.
No, but we had about half of you. Go ahead, Robert.
No, it's a safe space. It's okay. It's all right.
Yeah, everybody. We should retake it again. It's a safe space. Absolutely. Now I realize that, certain environments there, and then of course the data is not the most fragile thing in most people's environments, but certainly, a large enterprise customers, it becomes very complex and challenging. So what are the benefits? Is this me, Robert?
This I think all of us. I mean, this is sure. The carrot. All right, we talked about the stick earlier.
Yeah.
And look, there's at the end of the day, we all in our roles want different things. Development just, line of business wants to get it done faster. There's certain folks in our organizations that really care about quality, time to market. There's a lot of folks, especially in the operations side of the equation, they really focus on reducing risk. And, I just want to, echo back what Steven had said, that there is no reason that we can't apply these learnings of DevOps to the database here. There is nothing here. I mean, yes, there's, certainly taking care of the data is important. But, we can't just blast the database, drop it and recreate it, with a new schema change. We can't do that. We have to do things slightly differently. But there's no reason that we can't apply this idea of, benefiting development and operations, that we can't get faster just because it's the way we've always done it. We have to change. We have to improve. Steven, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's ultimately what it comes down to, I think, is the improvement, right? Which is, one of the things that you learn, both Robert and Adam have mentioned DORA, which I think, certainly brings to the table a lot of the sort of evolution and sort of procedural changes that we've seen and sort of what successful organizations are doing and what are the sort of most common characteristics. But, frankly, whether we're talking about the applications development side or whether we're talking about the sort of data management side, it is that improvement, right? It is a continual process of refinement. It is a continual process of improvement. And that is ultimately what, sort of what leads you to the outcomes that you want. Because, one of the things, again, that we've seen on the DevOps side, and we have seen this to a lesser extent, sort of on the data management side or the data ops side, is people who are sort of looking for a big bang quick fix, right? This is hey, I drop in a tool, or sort of I just decide overnight that things are going to be different. Generally speaking, it doesn't work that way, right? The tools have to go sort of in work in concert, if you will, with process and methodological improvements. So yeah, the better, the sort of the best approach that, we see modern software organizations taking is essentially that commitment to continual, constant refinement and improvement.
That's hard. It takes a lot of focus from management and everybody at the company to want to get better and to work towards that goal. It's constant. I don't know, Adam, do you think it's worth it?
I mean, I can be persuaded. I can be easily persuaded, to Lisa. No, so I think, so interesting, that same customer I was talking about, or prospect I was talking about earlier today, the reason they were interested in Delphix, because, going back to our pollsters, the 15% of people that have perfected data risk, perhaps, with no release errors and no automation or no automation hindrances. That maybe the guy I spoke to earlier is also on this call, because the concern is that they said, yes, sure, occasionally we do have data related like errors or release problems. Like it's minor, it's not something that's actually motivating us. But the reason why we want to talk to you is because even though we are so cautious, but we've perfected our caution, but our caution is costing us speed. And of course, they don't want to increase risk. They don't want to throw caution to the wind, but they realize that all the manual policies and procedures and human interactions, that checks and balances they put in, is not something that can be maneuverable today. It's like Stephen was talking about earlier. My credit union, God bless them, they've been forced to get in the digital age. Now, I wonder. I think they're more like the AOL prodigy days, but they're at least they're in and trying to embrace the digital age. And that's effectively what this large global company was doing as well. But the reason that they were interested in Delphix to come around to it is because they were interested. They want to decrease their time to market. They want to be able to they run in 2-week sprints, and they want to be able to have more burn down in their sprints, so they can get more features out in the same amount of sprint time, so they can get to market faster and not be outpaced by their competition. And one of the biggest barriers was just how hard and cumbersome it was to orchestrate the data and to get the right data into the hands of the people that need it instantaneously, and to be able to have that high confidence through automated controls that the data changes that were being done was acting upon solid data, and that it was reproducible, and that it wasn't relying on human intervention, and all those things. So they're seen as a bottleneck for them actually releasing. So I look here across these 4 silos. Their biggest concern wasn't improved quality. They wanted to maintain it, though if they could improve it, that's great. But it's all more so about reducing the risk of, from all the human controls they have in place, replacing the human controls and reducing the risk in the system, be able to increase the faster time to market, and be able to ultimately be able to faster develop. For them, it's 100% worth it, because as a huge organization with thousands of developers, they're getting eaten by the smaller new digital startups. They're just getting outpaced, like by the Netflix and others. So
it's a big, scary world out there.
It is for big dinosaurs. It certainly is.
Oh yeah. One last question: would increased automation in the database deployment process have the potential to accelerate overall application release cycles? Well, you tell us. Is it worth it? Is that something that would help your organization, or you think that's an area that you should focus on? We also have Q&A coming up here, and it looks like we're about to close out the poll, and then we're going to go discuss. Okay.
Yes. Oh, so maybe it is that guy. So they don't have quality issues, but man, they sure do want to go faster. Well, that's good. So that identifies then that story I was just telling. Great.
So we've got time for some questions here, but we also have one of the things that we're going to share with the attendees is white paper describing this stuff, and I think you can click on the handouts section of the GoToWebinar widget there and download that. We'll also probably be sending you a follow-up email. So I think it's question time. So I'm going to go ahead and look at the questions here. What do we have? And we got plenty of time to answer questions. So one we have here is, does Datical work with Oracle's DBMS and Oracle Cloud Fusion? The answer is yes. If you are executing SQL scripts to change the database, that's what Datical can do. And certainly Delphix providing those virtual databases, either data's masked or it's not, very quickly for the development team. That's what you need. Each developer should have their own environment. They should be able to hit a button and create a production-like environment to be able to test in isolation their changes. That's what you need. It's not just us. It's our friends over at Dora saying that, as Adam was mentioning earlier. But most companies don't have just one database. So it's really important that we have tooling that works with all the databases that we have, and that's where Datical and Delphix can really help out at. It's just not one. And so we've got some more questions coming.
Yeah, great. Thanks,
Christine,
Robert.
did you want to go ahead and see what else we had?
Yes, I'll take it from here. So this question looks like it might be directed towards Adam. Typically, what other DevOps tools does Delphix integrate with, and what is the method of integration?
Sure. So first, there's no other product that's more chocolate to my peanut butter than Datical. So I'll say that first. So even though we're separate companies, our customers get so much benefit out of using us together that commonly it seems anymore that I can't talk about one without the other. So, but in addition to that, obviously, you know, our customers we're really integrated to a lot of the largest companies CI/CD tool chains. So Jenkins is probably one of the biggest components besides Datical that we're used in tandem with all the time. Delphix itself, everything that you can do in Delphix, number one, the only client for Delphix, quote unquote, is we have a web browser. And it's also agentless, so you don't have to install agents on your system, so it makes it super easy to deploy. But then also every little web button you click, it's fully API driven. So literally you can open up the developer tools in a browser and see the JSON bodies and things that are being posted. So that means you can also automate that through anything. So if you go to the Delphix GitHub site, you see that we contribute a lot to open source, and some of the projects that I've created are all about automating. So I wrote Terraform plugins, Ansible plugins. I've got plenty of Packer stuff and all this stuff. So we're being automated. So when you're integrated into the SDLC like we are for a lot of the world's largest brands, we're plugged in everywhere you can imagine. But I'd say the number one thing besides Datical that we're paired with is Jenkins, and then after that, probably additionally Ansible and Terraform, and then of course for our pure Microsoft customers, they use us with VSTS or TFS as well. So thanks for the question.
Great. Now we have a listener whose company outsources and offshores some of the development and testing. So how would Delphix fit into a scenario where they need to share data externally?
Yeah, so actually that's probably one of the largest use cases for Delphix. So especially in this day of CCPA and GDPR, it's not a matter of logistically and physics, how do I get the data there and get it up to date and fresh, but it's also how do I do it and not go to jail. So with Delphix, we have the ability through our platform to not only be able to get the data to where it needs to be delivered in minutes, but we also have the ability to profile and mask that data according to the predefined policies. So like HIPAA, PCI compliance, those types of things, and be able to recommend, we found first names here and last names here, and we recommend you should mask these things. And again, it's all via web browser, so your security team can define the policy. And then since we have that ability that it's across all your heterogeneous data sources, you have the ability to be able to mask everything consistently across your enterprise. So Adam Bowen is always John Smith across all your applications. So that way you can actually have full business value data. But then one of the powerful things about Delphix is after you mask that, Delphix has the ability to then replicate that data to another Delphix platform that might be, say, in your offshore development, in say Pune or Krakow, or perhaps a cloud environment where you let people kind of play around. It's a sandbox. The ultimate benefit of being able to do this is that we call this selective data distribution. But that means in the event that one of those environments, whether it's the offshore or the cloud, when they are hacked, because we know it will happen, or when a bad actor is inside and does leak data, because it will happen eventually, the worst that's happened is that somebody has stolen an empty purse because the data looks realistic, it has the touch and feel of realistic data, but it's not actually your sensitive intellectual property, payment information, or customer information. And this is just set up with just a few clicks inside of Delphix, and we're able to replicate that in the beginning and then keep that in near real-time sync according to any sort of policy you have. So it's one of the best and most simplest use cases that we have. Thanks for the question.
Great. Now, what if you're using a managed data service provided by a cloud vendor? What value proposition can capabilities like Delphix add when using a service like RDS?
Sure. Yeah. So our platform has the ability to integrate with this, and I do appreciate all the Delphix questions. I hope there's some tactical questions in there as well. I'm sure Robert's like me too. But yeah. So I'll answer this one. Hopefully, we can switch to some tactical questions because I do see there are some in there. So we number one is like you take something like RDS. There's no masking capability in RDS today, and so our customers use us to be able to mask RDS instances because they have a production instance running in RDS, but they want all their lower environments to use masked copies of it because you still have the same kind of security concerns. So you're able to use our platform to mask it. And then our customers are also using us, I can't mention one by name, but in a high value way to be able to take that expensive RDS production instance and to be able to spin up many lower environment copies of that RDS instance to be able to develop and test and not be charged for fully managed high cost burden RDS instance. So they're able to get the masking and they're able to rapidly create the downstream copies they want and have all the controls that they want while leveraging all their cloud resources. So it's not an either or, you can have both with Delphix. Thanks for the question.
Great, yeah, and this one looks like a neutral question if you want to take this, Robert. We have a fully automated CI/CD pipeline. Data provisioning is, however, done manually, which slows us down. How can we improve the velocity of data provisioning?
Quit filing tickets, use Delphix. I mean, you need to get to the point where you're automating all of these things that you're doing. If you're relying on a person to do some activity, that's DevOps. We got to look at, the value stream map, see where the longest line between blocks are. Those blocks are processed. If we're waiting on a person, that's a bad thing, and we need to figure that out. But I do want to, talk about the elephant in the room, about automation. And automation is not about eliminating people. What it's about is taking our people to do higher order tasks. So regarding database provisioning, the idea of I have to call a DBA to get permission to actually do work, well, that's exactly what Delphix does. Same thing with I need to have somebody run a script against that database to update a schema. Well, that's what Datical does. But if we take those people that are doing those tasks, refreshing data, provisioning databases, running SQL scripts, and we put them in areas where they can do really cool stuff, like start evaluating whether we should use our current database platform or maybe look at something else, something open source, or maybe a NoSQL database. That's a higher order task. If we have those people look at how are we going to move the data to the cloud so that we can deploy our applications faster and take advantage of cloud native architectures for our applications. Yeah, that's where we should put our people, not just doing rote, manual drudgery.
Great, and looks like we have a Datical specific question. How does Datical support parallel development streams? For example, feature-based or trunk-based methodologies?
Well, we've got a lot of different ways of turning on or off certain functionality that you want to push out. And so we certainly have this concept of labels in Datical. So you can say, look, I've got 10 stories in this sprint and, 2 of them aren't ready. So I'm only going to push 8 of them. We can label those changes, still keep the other 2 in that artifact, and then maybe at the next sprint we're ready to release. But Datical is far superior than a SQL script. We do speak SQL to the database, but it's because we have a structured XML document to represent the change, and we have these just atomic units of change we call change sets. Those are very easy to merge in. And so if we have a parallel development team where, one team A has made changes to this XML file and another team has made other changes, well, there's going to be a merge. And it's much easier to merge blocks of XML than just SQL. Also, we're able to see that team that looks at that trunk, they do that pull merge. They pull it into their release branch before they merge it in to the trunk, the release branch. They're able to see, oh, hey, it looks like we're both changing the same stored procedure. Just like changing a developer or two developers are changing the same method in a Java class, there's a negotiation. There's in that merge process, it is, that's what CI does. Hey, looks like we're messing around in the same area. Perhaps we should have a conversation. And that's what Datical allows us to do, because we're no longer putting these changes into a ticket system that is very opaque and difficult to manage. We're able to manage those database code changes just like we manage our application code changes. And that is what's working over in the application side. No reason why we shouldn't apply it to the database side.
Great. And I know we're running out of time. So before we go, I just want to quickly throw it back to you guys for a final thought or key takeaway you want to leave our attendees with today.
Stephen, Adam?
Yeah, I'll take a quick shot at that. I think, as we've talked about, I think that the biggest thing for me, when we talk to organizations that are, sort of thinking about, or in some cases, trialing, sort of data ops, sort of type improvements, is really to, as we talked about this, earlier, to try to sort of move incrementally to try to, essentially improve the process sort of one step at a time. Because, if the history of DevOps has shown us anything, it's the folks that try to do too much too quickly, can run into trouble. Sort of, and part of that, of course, like I said, is the folks on the line from Datical and Delphix, I'm sure would be happy to talk to you about sort of how software can help, right? Because software is not a panacea, right? This is not a, hey, just drop in a piece of software and everything's sort of magically fixed. But similarly, as Robert sort of mentioned earlier, if you are doing or trying to do pieces of this manually, it's just not going to work. It's not a sustainable, it's not a scalable practice moving forward. So yeah, basically for me, from my standpoint, it's, have a thoughtful methodological rather, approach to this, and get help, from vendors, from analysts, whomever. So that's my take.
Well, I can't improve on that.
Great. Thanks, guys. Well, thank you. Thank you to our speakers for a great presentation today. Again, that was Robert Reeves, CTO and co-founder of Datical, Adam Bowen, a strategic advisor at Delphix, and Stephen O'Grady, principal analyst and co-founder at Redmuck. And thank you, Datical, for sponsoring today's event, and thanks for joining us today with our attendees. Until next time, I'm Christina Cardoza from SC Times.